It was a quiet evening in Austin, Texas. The sun had long set, and the house felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, catching up on emails and the usual day-to-day tasks. Dinner had been simple, pasta with a side salad. Isla was cleaning up the dishes in the kitchen. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and I could tell she was lost in thought. There was something different about her tonight. "Stephen, can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying an unfamiliar tone. I looked up, sensing the change in her. She wasn't the Isla I knew, not entirely. I set my phone down and walked toward her, wiping my hands on a napkin. "Sure. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath before speaking, as if she was preparing herself for something difficult. "I need to take one last trip with my ex before we get married. It's for closure." My stomach dropped, but I didn't show it. Instead, I pretended to process her words slowly, even though my pulse had already started to race. "Closure?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. Isla nodded, her eyes shifting away from mine, looking down at the plate she was drying. "Yes, Stephen." Daniel reached out. "We've both been carrying a lot of baggage from the past, and I just feel like I can't start our marriage with all of that unresolved. We just need to see each other one last time, to talk. Nothing more." Her words were calm, rehearsed even, as if she had thought this through over and over. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching her eyes shift nervously, avoiding mine. "Where is this trip going to be?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a small town near Dallas, close to a lake. We used to go there years ago, when things were different between us. Just for the weekend, 2 nights, maybe. I'll be back Sunday evening." She spoke so smoothly, as if she had planned this for weeks. It was clear to me that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. The late work nights, the hidden phone screens, the subtle smiles she shared with someone who wasn't me, all those things suddenly made sense. If she thought this was some last-minute confession, she was wrong. This had been brewing for a while, and I could feel it in my gut. I took a deep breath, trying to hold myself together. "Isla, if this is something you feel you need to do, then do it. I want you to be sure about us, not unsure." Her face relaxed, and she smiled at me, a smile that seemed too bright, almost too relieved. "Thank you, Stephen. I knew you'd understand. You're always so level-headed about things." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check, despite the growing anxiety inside me. "When are you leaving?" "Friday morning. I've already taken the time off work." Of course she had. Isla always had everything planned. I tried to push the frustration away, not wanting to let it show. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip, pretending to be unaffected. "Well, I hope you find the closure you're looking for." I meant it, in a way. But the truth was, something inside me had already broken. The wedding, the life I thought we would build together, it wasn't real anymore. Isla just didn't know that yet. The next morning, Isla left for work as usual. There were no signs of tension, no indication that she felt anything was amiss. It was like the conversation from the night before had never happened. But for me, everything had shifted. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, staring at the to-do list I had started writing. This wasn't going to be about anger. This was about clarity. Step 1. Protect my assets. I opened the shared account we had set up for wedding expenses. Most of it had come from my savings, and transferred my contributions into a private account under my name. I left a simple note in the transaction details: temporary balance adjustment. It looked harmless enough, but by the time Isla packed her bags on Friday, the account would be almost empty. Step 2. Vendors. I called the reception hall, the florist, the catering company. Everything was already booked. I asked them to hold the contracts under a corporate event title, so nothing would look out of place. At the same time, my deposits would stay secure. Each call ended the same way. "Thank you for your flexibility, Mr. Thompson." Step 3. Legal. I called my lawyer, Andrea, who had helped me when I bought the house. She picked up on the first ring. "What's going on?" she asked. "I need to know how to handle someone living in my property who's no longer welcome," I said evenly. "You're engaged, right?" she asked, a hint of understanding in her voice. "Not for long," I replied. Andrea didn't ask for the details. She just explained the process. Since Isla wasn't on the deed, a formal notice would be enough to remove her. She would draft the document and email it to me within the week. By the time Isla came home that evening, talking about her day as though nothing had changed, everything would be in motion. She smiled brightly as she spoke, and I listened intently, but something inside me had already shifted. Dinner was quiet, but the silence felt heavy. When she casually mentioned her plans for the drive to Dallas, I kept my response neutral. "That's a good idea," I said. "You should enjoy the scenery." Isla smiled, and I forced a small smile back. It wasn't real anymore. The wedding was over before it had even begun. By Thursday, everything was set. She thought she was going for closure. She was, but it wasn't the kind she imagined. I was preparing for certainty. Friday arrived sooner than expected. Isla left for work in the morning, her suitcase tucked neatly in the back of her car. She kissed me on the cheek before stepping out, as if nothing had changed. But I knew. I knew everything was already falling apart. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I picked up my phone and sent a brief text to Daniel, the private investigator I had hired the day before. "She's on her way," I wrote. The response came almost instantly. "Got it. We'll keep you updated." The house felt strangely quiet, almost empty. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. But inside, my thoughts were racing. Every move I made today had been calculated. Every decision I made was bringing me closer to the truth. I couldn't sit still for long. I stood up and began to clean the house, organizing things that had been untouched for weeks. It was a methodical distraction, something to keep my hands busy while my mind wandered back to Isla. I had no idea what to expect when she came back, but I was preparing for every possibility. At noon, I received an email notification. Subject: Photos and Receipts. I opened it immediately. The first photo was of Isla and Daniel standing on a dock, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the afternoon sun. They were standing close to each other, their hands almost touching. My stomach churned as I scrolled to the next image. The second photo was taken inside a small seafood cafe. Isla was laughing, a glass of wine in front of her, Daniel's hand placed gently over hers. My heart sank as I stared at the image. They were too comfortable together. Too familiar. The final photo sealed it. They were checking into a coastal inn, their bags in hand, the sign behind them clearly reading Bayview Harbor Suites. Isla's smile wasn't forced. It wasn't the polite grin she wore when she was with me. It was real, natural. It was a smile she gave only to someone she cared about. I zoomed in on Daniel's hand. He was wearing a wedding band. That was it. This wasn't just a closure trip. It was something far worse. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind racing. Daniel wasn't just Isla's ex. He was married. He was still married. And Isla was having an affair with him while planning our wedding. I called Daniel's number, needing confirmation. The line rang a few times before he picked up. "Hello." Daniel's voice was cool, calm, like he had no idea I knew anything. "It's Steven," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the fury boiling inside me. "I saw the pictures. What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end. I don't know what to say, man," Daniel finally said. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I cut him off. "You're married, Daniel. I have the proof. Don't lie to me." "I didn't want this to be messy," Daniel said, his voice low. "Melissa doesn't know about this." "I'm sure she doesn't," I replied, bitterness dripping from my words. "But now I know. And so does Isla. But don't worry, I'll take care of this." "Steven, I never meant to hurt you," Daniel stammered. I hung up without responding. There was nothing left to say to him. I already had all the proof I needed. Now, all I needed was to wait for Isla's return. I would confront her with everything. But not yet. Not until everything was in place. When Isla came home that evening, she seemed lighter, almost relieved. She spoke about her trip with a kind of peace in her voice. "It really helped me, Steven. I feel like I've finally let go of the past. It's all behind me now." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "I'm glad, Isla. I want you to feel like you can move forward." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made my heart ache. I knew you'd understand. You always know how to make me feel better. I stood and walked to the living room, where I'd set up everything I needed. The brown folder sat on the coffee table, a simple, inconspicuous object, but I knew that inside it was the key to ending all of this. Isla, I said, my voice calm but firm. I have something for you. She frowned and walked toward me. What's this? She asked, her voice nervous but trying to mask it. I gestured toward the folder. Open it. Isla hesitated for a moment, her hands trembling as she lifted the flap. Her eyes quickly scanned the first photo, and her face went pale. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the photo, her lips parted in shock. The second photo made her flinch. She quickly flipped through it to the next image. And that's when I saw it. Her expression crumpled. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Where did you get these? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't need to say anything. She already knew. I had someone follow you, I said, my voice steady but cold. I needed to be sure about what you meant by closure. Isla looked down at the folder, her hands shaking as she closed it slowly. Her face was pale now, her composure shattered. It's not what you think, Stephen, she said quietly, her voice breaking. We just talked. That's all. Talked. I said, my voice rising slightly. In a king bed? In a hotel room with your ex-husband, Isla? Is that how you talk? She covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. It was a mistake. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. I didn't feel anger. I just felt empty. Don't lie to me again, Isla. You don't need to hide it anymore. I know the truth. I pulled out a legal document from my jacket. This is a formal notice from my attorney. You have 30 days to move out. Your things are already packed in the guest room. Her sobs intensified. Please, Stephen. Don't do this. I love you. I made a mistake. I stood up, looking at her one last time. You made your choice, Isla. Now I'm just giving you the closure you asked for. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stared at the floor, tears streaming down her face. Then, without another word, she picked up her bag and walked out. The days that followed Isla's departure were a blur of silence and unanswered messages. Her phone calls stopped coming. At first, I thought she might be processing everything, coming to terms with her actions. But as the days dragged on, I began to realize that she wasn't going to fight for us. The relationship I thought I had with her, the one we were supposed to build a future around, was crumbling in front of me. I kept to myself, trying to stay busy with work and other distractions, but the house felt eerily quiet without her. The empty spaces between us were filled with thoughts of betrayal and disappointment. Every corner of the house reminded me of the life I thought we were going to have. Then came the calls, first from Isla, then from her mother, and finally from her father. Each one came with a sense of urgency, of pleading. The first was from Isla early Monday morning. Her name flashed on my phone, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies yet. I couldn't let myself fall into that trap again. By noon, her name showed up on my text messages. Please, Stephen, can we talk? I made a mistake. I was confused. We can fix this. Please don't throw everything away. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keys. I could feel the weight of her words pressing down on me, the guilt she was trying to force onto me. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I turned off my notifications and set the phone face down. It was the only way to stop myself from responding. Later that evening, another text came through, this time from her friend Stephanie. She's a mess. She hasn't left her parents' house since Saturday. She doesn't know how to fix this. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew what was going on. Isla was unraveling, and it wasn't my responsibility to pick up the pieces. But then, just when I thought the storm had passed, her mother, Elena, called me. Her voice was softer this time, but there was an undercurrent of authority. Stephen, she began, her tone calm but sharp beneath. She's broken. You've made your point. Ending the engagement publicly will destroy her. Please, let's not do this. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall, trying to stay composed. Elena, She did this to herself. I'm just stepping aside. You're being cruel, she replied, her voice wavering slightly. Please, Stephen, think about what you're doing. I let out a sigh. No, Elelainer. I'm being clear. I hung up before she could say anything more. I was done. There was no point in continuing the conversation. An hour later, I received a call from Isla's father, Victor. His voice came through the phone like a hammer, hard and threatening. If you embarrass my daughter, Stephen, I'll make sure you regret it, he warned. I almost smiled at the absurdity of it. Well, I guess we'll both be having busy weekends, won't we? I said calmly before hanging up. By Wednesday, Isla had changed her approach. This time, she showed up at my office building. I saw her through the glass doors, standing outside in the parking lot, waiting. She looked different, tired, thinner, and not at all the confident woman I had seen just a few days ago. I walked outside, meeting her halfway. Her eyes were red, and she looked desperate, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything for her anymore. Stephen, please, she said, her voice cracking. Please don't make this worse. At least come to the engagement dinner. My parents have already paid for everything. They're expecting you there. I looked at her for a long moment. I could see the hope in her eyes, but it wasn't enough to move me. All right, I said quietly, my voice steady. I'll be there. But it's time everyone saw the truth for themselves. She nodded, relieved. Thank you. You won't regret it, I promise. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, my mind already racing with what would come next. That evening, I called the restaurant to make a few changes. I spoke to the manager, asking for a private room for the dinner and making sure everything was in place. By Friday, everything was set. But it wasn't going to be a night of celebration. It was going to be the final act, the moment of truth. When I arrived at the restaurant, I could feel the tension in the air. Isla was mingling with the guests, her smile too bright, her laughter too forced. Her parents were nearby, greeting people as if everything was perfectly fine. But I saw through it all. The cracks were visible if you looked closely enough. I took my seat in the back, unnoticed by most, but I could feel the eyes of those who knew me, waiting for something to happen. They didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. Elelainer raised her glass, making a toast. To love that endures, to forgiveness, and to new beginnings, she said, glancing at both me and Isla. Because true love always finds its way back. The room clapped politely, and people exchanged glances, waiting for me to react. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of their gazes on me. The room fell silent. Thank you, Elelainer, I said, my voice carrying enough to quiet the room. And thank you all for coming. I have something I'd like to say. Isla looked at me, her eyes wide with expectation, hoping I would change my mind. But I was done pretending. Isla once told me she needed a trip with her ex before marrying me for closure, I began. She promised it was innocent. It wasn't. The room froze. I placed my glass down and pulled out the envelope from my jacket. Inside this envelope are photos and receipts. I'm not sharing them publicly, but Isla, your parents and I know what's in them. That's enough. Isla's face drained of color. Her voice broke. Stephen, stop, please. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I'm not angry. I'm just done. I handed the envelope to her father, who stared at it, his face hard and unreadable. Enjoy your evening, I said quietly, turning and walking out of the room. I walked out of the restaurant with a calmness I didn't expect. My steps were steady, deliberate, as though the weight of everything that had happened had finally lifted from my shoulders. The door swung closed behind me, muffling the murmurs and whispers that I knew were starting to swirl inside. I didn't care. The truth was out. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, the weight of the night's events began to settle in. I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I had just closed the door on an old chapter of my life. But there was no satisfaction in it. No victory, no celebration. Just the cold, unfeeling truth. I didn't check my phone that night. I didn't need to. The messages from Isla and her family were already piling up. I knew what they said, pleas for forgiveness, for understanding. But I wasn't interested in any of it. I was done. The The next few days were filled with the aftermath. Isla's calls came relentlessly, but I didn't answer. Her voice, her words, her tears, they all meant nothing to me now. Her apologies were empty. She had made her choice, and so had I. By Monday, the news had spread. Small towns have a way of making everything public, and the dinner was no exception. Word had already gotten out, and I wasn't surprised. People were whispering, some offering their sympathies, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But no one had to tell me that Isla was unraveling. I already knew. The text messages from her friend Stephanie continued, telling me how Isla had locked herself away in her parents' house, refusing to come out, barely eating, barely speaking. She was a shell of the woman I once knew. That's when the calls from her family began. Elelainer, then Victor, then Isla's brother Derek, all of them trying to get me to reconsider. Trying to convince me that I was making a mistake. That I should forgive her and move on. But I had already moved on. I didn't need their pleading. Isla had made her choice, and so had I. A week later, I saw her again, by accident. I was at the grocery store, picking up a few things, when I turned a corner and saw her standing at the produce section. She looked different, older, thinner. She wasn't the confident woman I had once loved. She was a stranger now, and I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and she hesitated, as if unsure of what to do. I didn't speak. I didn't approach her. I just stood there, frozen for a split second, before I turned and walked in the other direction. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Isla spent the rest of her days behind closed blinds. From what I heard, she quit her job too, unable to face the whispers from her coworkers. She moved into a small rental apartment near her parents' house, a far cry from the life she had once envisioned with me. I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't care. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. As for me, I was moving on. The weight of the past was finally gone. I could breathe again. I could think clearly again. I had no more doubts, no more questions. I had closure, even if it wasn't the kind I had expected. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to return to normal. I focused on my work, my friends, my future. I didn't allow myself to look back at the relationship with Isla, not even for a second. But then one evening, I got another text. It wasn't from Isla. It wasn't from her parents. It was from Stephanie, her friend. She's gone, Stephen. I think you should know. I didn't know what she meant at first. It took me a moment to realize what she was saying. Isla had disappeared. She wasn't answering calls, and no one had seen her for days. She had left her apartment and her parents' house behind without a trace. The next few days were filled with confusion and concern. I wasn't the one who was supposed to care, but somehow, I found myself looking for answers. I didn't hear anything more about Isla after that. Time passed, and life continued. My days were filled with the usual rhythms, work, meetings, social gatherings, but there was always something in the back of my mind, a quiet echo of a life that could have been. I couldn't erase what had happened, but I could move on from it. And that's exactly what I did. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. A peace that came from knowing I had made the right choice. Then months later, I saw Isla again. This time, it wasn't by accident. She was standing at the edge of a cafe, her back to me, looking out the window. She hadn't changed much. She still looked tired, worn down by the weight of everything she'd done. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. She turned around, sensing my presence. Our eyes met once again. She looked older, thinner, but the sadness in her eyes hadn't gone away. Isla opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I simply turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. I had my closure. I had moved on. She was a chapter in my past, and that was where she was going to stay. The weeks following that brief encounter in the cafe were quiet, almost peaceful. I kept to myself, focusing on my work and keeping a steady pace in my daily life. Isla had become a distant memory, a figure in the background of my past, and I was learning to live without her. I didn't think much about her, until one rainy afternoon, as I was leaving my office building, I spotted a familiar face. It was Isla. She was standing near the corner of the street, looking lost and out of place in the pouring rain. Her hair was damp, her coat soaked through, and her expression was distant, as if the weight of the world was still pressing down on her. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away and pretend I hadn't seen her. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, the love we once shared, couldn't just ignore her. I approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. She didn't notice me at first, her eyes fixed on the ground, lost in thought. But when I stepped closer, she looked up, and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. But in that silence, something passed between us, a quiet understanding, a shared recognition of the past. "Stephen," she said softly, her voice shaky. "I didn't expect to see you." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. She seemed different, more fragile, less the woman I had once loved, and more like a stranger I had briefly known. "I didn't think I'd see you again either," I replied, my voice steady. I was no longer angry, no longer bitter. It was as if I had let go of all that with time. She gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the way I treated you, for the lies, for breaking your heart. I didn't interrupt her. I just stood there, waiting for her to finish, watching her struggle with the words. "I was confused," she continued. "I didn't know what I wanted, and I hurt you in the process. I've been trying to fix things, to find peace. But I don't think I ever will." She looked away, her gaze drifting down the street as if searching for something she couldn't quite find. I watched her for a moment, processing everything she said. It wasn't an easy thing for her to admit, and part of me felt pity for her. But I knew that what she needed most wasn't my forgiveness. It was her own acceptance of what she had done. "You can't fix the past, Isla," I said, my voice calm. "All we can do is learn from it. I've done that. And I think you need to do the same." She nodded slowly, her face tense as she fought to hold back tears. "I know. I thought I had it all figured out, you know? That we'd get married and everything would be perfect. But I was wrong. I was selfish. I didn't want to feel sorry for her, but I did. There was something heartbreaking about watching her like this, knowing she was struggling with the consequences of her actions. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, breaking the silence. I was. For a long time. But not anymore. I've moved on, Isla. And I think it's time you do too. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. You were always so good to me, Stephen. I didn't deserve you." I shook my head, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "You were who you were. And I was who I was. But we were never right for each other. And that's okay." There was a long pause between us, the sound of the rain growing louder as it soaked the streets. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This was it. The last piece of the puzzle. The closure we both needed. "I guess this is goodbye," Isla said softly, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. I looked at her one last time. She was standing there, alone in the rain, but it wasn't my responsibility to shelter her anymore. She had to find her own way forward. "Goodbye, Isla," I said quietly. "Take care of yourself." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her figure slowly fading into the misty rain behind me. I didn't look back. The road ahead of me was clearer now. There was no more lingering pain, no more questions left unanswered. I had my closure. And now, I was free.